Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. I got to record these Wednesday late morning because I have a few things scheduled for the next few days that hopefully will be out for all of you soonish that I hope you'll enjoy at least. But anyway, let's jump in and see what questions we have this week. First up, over on Floatplane, Dumez wants to know what wizardry is going on in the Dreamcast VGA box. If the Dreamcast supports VGA output natively, what exactly is in the box? And is there a difference between off-brand VGA boxes and the Sega official? So I believe the only thing that the Dreamcast's VGA box, the official one from Sega, is doing is allowing you to select between video modes. So just like any of the other switchable Dreamcast analog output solutions, power off the Dreamcast, flip the switch to 15 kilohertz mode, and that enables its composite, S-video, and stereo audio outputs. Power it off, flip it over to 31 kilohertz mode, and you get 480p output via the VGA port. And that's why there's circuitry, so that it switches between those two. And in the stuff that I recommend, like for example, the SCART cables, all of that circuitry is shrunk down into a tiny little PCB. Because the Dreamcast, I believe their official VGA box used all through-hole components, which are physically larger, which required the big box. Same with the giant VGA connector and RCA connectors. Whereas the one in the SCART cables, all you really need are the switch, the ability to pass through RGBS to the SCART head, and then the ability to pass through the VGA signal through a sync combining circuit to also keep it the same RGBS. So that's basically the difference. Now, or that's why you needed all those components in it. And the difference between that and others all really come down to the quality of the build, because there are some pretty notorious VGA boxes that have gotten worse with time, shockingly enough, that only support the higher end signals, so not composite or S-video, but the little pigtail cables are terrible and introduce a ton of interference on the screen in both modes. They're constantly breaking. So quality of the build, quality of the circuit, quality of the cable connecting it are all huge factors. And that's why if you're going to go with something like one of those SCART options, the ones I recommend in the Dreamcast section are ones I've tried for a long time and have always been working well. Also, just a VGA cable. I've had so much more luck with the cheap ones in the past couple of years than I did when I first started RetroRGB, and you might still end up with a garbage one from Amazon, but it's worth trying because you could always return it, but you'll know immediately if it's garbage, because if you plug it in, even on not even through digital displays, even just a PC CRT monitor, if you see horizontal interference across the screen, then you know it's a terrible cable and you should just return it. Then, you could nitpick past that if you'd like, but I just think for the price, I would just, if it's not perfect, I'm fine. But if it's terrible, then I would absolutely return it. So I guess to just swing back to your question, the Dreamcast official VGA box is for somebody that wants one box that does all of the supported outputs, and that's why there's circuitry in it. But I do think that basically every other quality option is better in this case for these days. But yeah, let me know if you had anything else specific you were looking for. But if you're just curious about the Dreamcast VGA box, I'm pretty sure that's it. Obviously, let me know in the comments if I got that wrong, but pretty sure that one was it. Now, switching over to Patreon, a couple of questions from Raymond Verde. First, they want their Mister to connect to two RGB monitors, one Commodore 1084S and one Philips TV. How could they send this to two screens and it does not need to be simultaneous, and they want to do that on a budget? So I have an idea on this. Now, there's going to be a catch here, so let me just explain what I mean first. I like to usually answer first, but give me a minute here. If you said you have one composite video console that you want to split between two composite video inputs on CRTs, and you do not need them simultaneous, you just need to switch between them, what I would actually say is get a manual push button switch for as cheap as you could find them, put the console into the output, and then plug the monitors into a couple of the inputs, and then when you push the buttons, that would match up. And that would definitely work if you only connected those and you connected them the way I said it, because manual push button switches don't have any circuitry. They're the exact equivalent of unplugging and plugging cables in, as if you just left everything kind of hanging and had some couplers to plug them in together. Now, that would absolutely work in that scenario, in S-video, and in component video, but if you're talking about SCART, the problem with doing something like that is the switch has to be wired for all of the pins because RGB and audio have different inputs and outputs. It's actually a long reason as to why you're supposed to be able to do that. So if you wanted to try that out, my favorite entry-level switch is the one from Retro Gaming Cables, and you should be able to do something like I just explained. But if it's not wired that way, then you would end up with a switch that a very good switch if you need a SCART switch, but it's either going to work or it's not. Luckily, it won't harm anything that way. But to be clear, this is not a Y circuit like I always warn people against. You're not taking one console and splitting it to two at the same time. The fact that it's a push button switch means you're physically disconnecting one as you're connecting the other. So that's why it's safe to do it that way. As long as you don't connect anything else, it should be fine. So you could certainly give that a try. You could also use just SCART couplers and just plug one in at a time. So that way, instead of reaching behind the monitor, you have your SCART cable coming out from behind it, or over to the side if you want to make it neat. And then whatever you want to connect it to, you just plug it into those, essentially making it an extension cable. And that would absolutely work, especially with one of those couplers. If you're not talking about RGB SCART, there could be a couple of other different ways to go about doing this, but let me know what you think about that first, and we'll go from there. Next, their analog pocket dock has failed. It does charge, but it doesn't output HDMI anymore. Should they consider buying a consolizer solution? What are the pros and cons for going the consolizer route or standard docking solution? Well, I think you might mean the analogizer. And that's an awesome solution, but there are only two drawbacks. First, it's only analog output, which if you are just going to RGB monitors, that's not a downside at all. But if you were going to a flat panel, then you would need a scaler at that point. And the other downside is I believe that only works with the open FPGA cores. So if you're using original cartridges, you're not going to be able to display them that way. Whereas if you're using the open cores, then it would probably just work the same. On the flip side, the original dock only outputs HDMI, but if that's your goal, that would obviously be the better way to do it. So unless I'm missing something, I'm pretty sure that's the best way to go about replacing the dock. And, maybe email them too. Who knows? Maybe it's still under warranty or something. You never know. But yeah, I'll leave links to the Switch as well as the Analogizer post if you're interested in any of that stuff. Next up, Dustin Madison just wanted to confirm it was okay that I shared the video from last week, which was in the description of the YouTube video, the podcast, everything. So if you're interested, give it a shot. Dustin said there were two shows that day, one for families and one for strictly adults. They were only on the adult one, and their act that night would be considered TV friendly if after 8 p.m., minus the couple of F-bombs you dropped, which, listen, if you're going to an adult-only comedy show and you're offended that somebody drops the F-bomb, that's your fault, not the comedians. I know that's probably going to upset some people, but seriously, you paid a ticket and you walked into a place to have somebody make fun of things, you're going to expect some swearing. So that's totally fine. Their sense of humor on stage isn't very raunchy, really, except maybe at an open mic, because hell, no one really gives a crap anyway at an open mic bar, right? Oh, and something new happened too. They're now a certified producer for the Clean Comedy Collective. Yes, the irony doesn't elude me. But yeah, they can work clean, and they've got folks they work with who also can work clean. So it's kind of have to if clients are going to be groups like charities or retro gaming expos and stuff like that. So cool. Yeah. Good. Glad to hear that you're adapting. But yeah, it's kind of funny to hear that you're part of the Clean Comedy Collective now. Next up, Tony Escobar is playing their first ever Dreamcast game, Skies of Arcadia, on their Sony PVM 14L5. It's gorgeous and one of their favorite games now to boot. The RIP they're playing is redump verified, and they're playing it on a mode. They noticed that when they switched over to Disc 2, the aspect ratio seems narrower on their PVM. That's weird. They tried the new RGB compatible version, and it also was narrower on Disc 2. Disc 1, as far as they could tell, fills up the whole screen. They were wondering if this was a known thing with that game, otherwise they're thoroughly enjoying it on their PVM. So I reached out to somebody who is familiar with the game, and they said they'd never heard of that either. So the best thing to do is probably to post in the main thread for that on the Dreamcast forums and see what's going on. It's possible that the game or the RIP that you downloaded may have some issues. There's a lot of things that are possible, including maybe it just looks like that. I don't know. I've never played that game, but I know a lot of people who like it a lot, and we're very, very happy that the patch became available to have it run properly on all regions of the games in all modes, basically. So yeah, I think I would start there and kind of go from there and see what happens. But hopefully this is just a quick little quirk that you could get worked out pretty easily. And if not, at least the game is still playable, but it does sound weird. It doesn't sound like the right thing. So maybe it's a PAL NTSC thing. I don't really know, but I would start there and kind of see where to go. And, if you find a solution, please let us know. I think other people listening might be wondering. Maybe there's a bunch of people who are just about to start playing that game, but they want to make sure that they don't run into that issue. So good luck with that, and, let us know. One more question from Tony. They purchased Retro Remakes Taki Udan's Super 5 OLED Touch Megakit. They watched Retro Game Corp's video and were surprised to learn the upgrade OLED screen is 1080p. They've watched DF and My Life in Gaming's deep dive reviews of the Switch 2, both of which is detailed discussion about 720p Switch 1 content being displayed on a 1080p screen. They were wondering what my thoughts were before I attempted the mod. While solderless, the mod appears to be finicky and time-consuming. What's my thoughts on this? So I don't know anything about this screen at all. So what I can tell you, though, is my personal opinion, which, if everybody disagrees with this, that's totally fine. But if I were planning on getting a Switch 2, I would not be messing with any of this stuff on my Switch 1. I would get the Switch 2, and I would really appreciate the upgraded performance. And if there are issues with games, 720p native games running in 1080p, I don't know. I think the higher frame rates and the higher resolution that these games could be rendered in are a much bigger trade-off. Now, once again, that's just an opinion. You all are welcome to do anything that you would like with your consoles. But for me personally, I don't know anything about it, so I'm going to be useless to you. And I definitely wouldn't do that because, what if you take the time to do all this and you end up ruining a perfectly good Switch that you could have saved or sold to get money towards the Switch 2. So those are just my opinions, but if anybody has any thoughts on that, post in the comments. I'm kind of curious what people would think, but certainly not something that I personally would want on my Switch. I also don't play my Switch in handheld mode, so I'm probably the worst person to give advice for that, but it's me, so I still word vomited it anyway. Next up, a random Kaz is looking to upgrade the display in their gaming setup, and they're looking for a flat panel that can't be bigger than about 32 inches because of the way that the whole area is configured in the room. So their question is, should they get a TV or a computer monitor? Because these days, 32-inch TVs are either super low end or really max out at 1080p, whereas you can get really nice PC monitors at that size or close to it. And my answer to you is absolutely hell yeah, get a PC monitor. It's going to perform so much better for gaming than some cheap TV. And, for the record, I read every word of your question. I just didn't repeat it all out loud, just for the sake of everybody else's time. But I read your question, I read your setup, and I think that for somebody like you with a mix of mostly modern and some retro, but also a PC attached to it as well, could really take advantage of things like higher refresh rates. So while without running it through a scaler to add BFI, a 60 or 50 hertz console isn't going to perform any better on a higher refresh rate monitor, your PC would. So I would absolutely look into 1080p, 1440p, or 4K, and just get the best PC monitor you could afford. Now, the only other thing a random Kaz mentioned was the ability to swivel it and possibly rotate it as well. So the only thing I would add is if you found a monitor that looked good, it looked all the specs matched up, but it doesn't swivel, just check to make sure it has a VESA mount pattern on the back, and you could always just get a separate stand for it. So just, toss the one that came with it into a box somewhere and label it, and make sure to label it. Can't tell you how many times I've been going through friends' houses trying to put together old TVs to sell, and we can't figure out which stand goes to which monitor. But anyway, that way you could just have it work whatever way you want, including a wall mount or anything else. So I wouldn't let the stand deter you from purchasing it if everything else is okay. And you can get some really, really nice monitors. The OLED monitor I'm borrowing is a 32-inch 4K 240 1080p 480 monitor, and it's absolutely awesome, and it rotates, but I don't think it swivels, or it certainly doesn't swivel very far. So let's say you stumbled across that exact one, that definitely has a VESA pattern on it. So you could just take that stand off, slap a different one on, and you're good to go. The only other thing to add is don't make the mistake so many of us make where if you find a display that has speakers built in, you think, okay, I'll get speakers later and just use the ones that are in there for now and then never get them. Even that 32-inch OLED, it has speakers. And in the context of PC monitor speakers, they're very good. But in the context of any desktop, like bookshelf style monitor, they're awful. They're all awful. So while you certainly don't need to run out and do that right away, I would just make a point at some point in the future to get yourself decent enough speakers or headphones or however else you prefer to listen to audio, and don't just rely on the monitor. So that's basically it, but feel free to ask any other questions if you're interested, and welcome and thank you for your support. Next up, Rent Optional had a few people ask them to do an NESRGB install. The kits now come with a super convenient socket to solder onto the NES board, and the mod basically snaps in nice and easy. No problems at all with the mods, but both times when shipping back, the mod popped out of the socket in shipping. They could not have packed them any better. They've even done drop tests in their house in the boxes, and the mods stay in place. The shipping service must just enjoy kicking them around during shipping. Oh, you have no idea what goes on with those things. It is horrifying, and I'm shocked most packages arrive at all. But continuing, it's a pretty simple fix to just open up the console and pop it back in, but they're hoping to avoid that in the future. They'd still rather use the included socket rather than solder their mod directly to the board. Would capped-on tape work to secure it better? They'd rather not use hot glue or solder. Any other tips for keeping it in place? So this is one of those times where you're probably going to just have to talk to your customers. And if your customer is the type of person that says, I don't want to touch a screwdriver. If I wanted to touch a screwdriver, I'd try to do the mod myself. I'm going to pay you a fair price to do it for me. Then you got to figure something out. But if it's the type of person where they're like, yeah, I don't know how to desolder anything, but I could easily use a screwdriver, what do you need? In that case, I would take some kind of soft shipping material, like some kind of spongy material, and stick it beneath there and bolt the console together. Maybe don't put the bolts in super tight, just so it's easy for people to remove it. But that's certainly one way to keep it in place. And as long as you use something that's non-conductive, it's not going to blow up if somebody plugs it in. But tell your customer, it's really up to them. They need to open it up and remove it before use. And if they're cool with that, that'll work. But this is actually where I think alternative solutions, as long as your customer knows about it, is totally fine. And I would try hot glue, because remember, hot glue is not permanent. It dries out and falls off, but it's non-conductive. So if you're able to use some, dab in each corner, wait for it to dry before shipping, and then ship it out that way, it should survive. However, at some point, it's going to kind of crack and fall out. So the customer is going to pick up their NES and something's going to be rattling around in it, but it's not conductive. So if your customer is aware of that and knows, hey, at some point when you hear something rattling, it's probably just the glue that held it in place for shipping, and show them pictures of the installation so they know that you're not just completely gluing everything in, you're using it just for shipping support. They could be okay with that. You could try it with tape, but I'm not sure how that would work. And I'm not sure if you would be able to do it in a way where it wouldn't clump up or cause any kind of problems in the future. But I'm interested to hear anybody else's opinions. There's some really good suggestions in this chat all the time. So if I'm missing something, somebody please, chime in and let us know. But I just think transparency to your customers is number one here. And after that, just kind of find the solution that works best for them. And if the solution is, or if the customer is like, no, I want it flawless and I'm not touching a screwdriver, and, you kind of figure it out, and you might have to just decline. And that's totally fine, but you might just have to tell them, hey, you got to find somebody local then, so you could drive and pick it up so you don't have to worry about this. And that's totally fine too. But hopefully you could at least kind of figure it out and get this going. But anybody else have any tips? Well, that's it for this week. As always, if you have any questions at all, please just ask them wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post, because the way these services work, I can't really figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, as you saw here today, I like just scrolling through and answering them in real time as if we were hanging out at an expo somewhere together. So any questions you have, just put them in the latest Q&A post wherever you support. And of course, and as always, thank you to everybody who supports in absolutely any way, because it really is you who's keeping all this stuff going. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week.